Today, I came with a very unique story. Happened in 1959. It was a challenge started by Luxembourg Radio. When they started this challenge, no one will appear. But suddenly one person came up, and he was Birger Narvik. This is a very interesting story, so stay tuned. The brave traveler was a massive block of ice weighing 350 kilograms. Let us first take a step back. Though the trip took place in the fall of 1959, the inspiration for it came the previous summer. During that summer, Radio Luxembourg challenged anyone and everyone to transport 3 tons of ice from the Arctic Circle to the scorching temperatures of the Earth's equator. The station established 2 major rules. First, they stated that no refrigeration could be used, making the trip difficult. The second rule was that the challenger would receive 100,000 francs for every kilogram of ice that remained upon arrival at the equator, which equates to about $16,000 in current currency. If the trip were made today, the big block of ice would have been worth around $48 million at the start of the journey, so anyone willing to take on the challenge was dealing with a very expensive piece of ice. Of course, Radio Luxembourg assumed that no one would attempt the challenge. It had to be an impossible task. No one could transport a block of ice from the Arctic to the equator without the ice melting for several weeks. So they reasoned. One man rose to the occasion and accepted the challenge. Birger Narvik was the managing director of Glasvat, a Norwegian insulation material company. He was confident in the performance of his company's glass wool insulation. If he succeeds, he will be able to win a large sum of money for the company and its employees. Narvik attracted a lot of attention in his attempt to assemble a team capable of completing the challenge. When Radio Luxembourg learned of Narvik's ambitions, they quickly rescinded their offer. They were terrified of losing so much money. Narvik, on the other hand, decided to continue his quest. Though he could no longer win money, he and his company could potentially gain a lot of attention. So the journey could finally begin. The ice and its entourage were scheduled to travel from the Norwegian town of Mo i Rana to Libreville, Gabon's modern-day capital. The epic journey would take the brave explorers through Copenhagen, Hamburg, Brussels, Paris, Algiers, Niger, and other cities as the icy block made its way from the world's coldest region to some of the world's hottest countries. The team was put together. Narvik delegated the task to Sivert Klepp, an expert engineer with exceptional public relations skills. Several drivers, a workshop manager, and 2 film crew members joined the team. When the trip gained widespread media attention, many companies stepped forward to sponsor it. The expedition was funded by 8 different countries, including Shell, which provided fuel, and Scania, which provided the truck. Obtaining the entire 3-ton block of ice from Arctic glaciers in one go seemed impossible. So 200 kilograms blocks were cut out and airlifted to the starting point instead. They were then frozen together to form a 350 kilograms solid block of ice. The ice was placed in a specially built iron container that was insulated with wood and 10 inches thick glass wool made of glass fiber. The truck was also loaded with 300 kilograms of medicines, which were to be delivered to the humanitarian Albert Schweitzer Hospital near the final destination of Libreville, Gabon's capital. The journey began on February 22, 1959. The European leg of the journey was relatively easy due to pleasant temperatures, good roads, and stable conditions. Crowds would gather in every major city to applaud and watch as word of the journey spread around the world. As the journey progressed, so did the publicity. The team and the trip were quickly gaining notoriety. When the team arrived in Paris, police officers escorted the ice-carrying truck through the city's congested streets. The cast was even invited to dinner with Paris Mayor. When we arrived in Marseille, it was time to leave Europe behind and venture into the harsher conditions of Africa. The team would spend the majority of their journey traveling through the scorching hot sands of the Sahara Desert. The entire truck, still loaded with ice, was lifted onto a boat in Marseille's port and transported across the ocean. The team, along with their icy cargo, had arrived in Africa. This African leg of the journey was extremely dangerous. Not only was the ice at risk of melting in the hot sun, but the truck's crew was also in danger of dying. Parts of the mega-hot, vast, sandy Sahara were at war, and many areas were teeming with guerrilla forces hiding in the mountains. These fighters posed a significant threat. They could steal the 300 kilograms of medicines that the crew was transporting. Worse, they may kidnap and murder the crew to gain publicity. Because of these dangers, the crew was accompanied by the French Foreign Legion, which was stationed in the area at the time, for some of the desert section. The crew was instructed by the French Foreign Legion to drive for their lives, stopping as little as possible. What had begun as a harmless publicity stunt had turned into a battle for survival. But despite their best efforts, the crew was unable to make rapid progress. Because there were no roads in many areas of the Sahara, the crew had to drive through the sand, and because the truck was so heavy, it would frequently become trapped in the sand's depths. When this happened, the ice-carrying crew would spend hours digging through the sand to free the truck and its valuable cargo. It was an insanely dangerous mission in temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius, with few resources and the deadly threat of freedom fighters. Small sections of the ice were melting, threatening to derail the journey entirely. If the crew became trapped in the sand for an extended period, the ice may perish. During this leg of the journey, the crew encountered a nomadic Tuareg tribe riding on the backs of camels. The crew provided water to the nomads' camels by opening the container containing the ice. The lucky camels drank the world's most expensive water, a precious liquid that had already traveled thousands of miles from the Norwegian glacier where it had once lived. As the crew continued through the desert, they frequently slept in sleeping bags on the Sahara sands, gradually navigating the terrain and all of its challenges. And they did, eventually leaving the hostile sands behind and creeping closer to their final destination of Gabon. They eventually, and miraculously, arrived at their intended destination. The crew and the remaining ice arrived in Libreville 27 days after they left. They were secure. They'd finished their seemingly impossible journey. But how much ice remained? The block was weighed with trepidation, and the outcomes were nothing short of miraculous. The block weighed 3,050 kilograms when it left Norway. It weighed 2,714 kilograms 27 days later, right on the sweltering equator. Only 336 kilograms of ice were lost on the journey. Only 11% of the ice had melted. Although Radio Luxembourg's initial challenge and the financial reward that came with it had been withdrawn, the journey had been a success. If the cash reward had still been in place, the ice would be worth around $43 million today, making it the world's most expensive piece of frozen water. Instead of making a large profit for the company, the ice was put to better use. Though some were flown back home, the majority were cut up and given to Gabonese people who had never seen ice before. When the crew arrived in Libreville, they were invited to dinner with French President Charles de Gaulle in Paris, but only if they drove back to Paris. The exhausted crew refused and instead chose to fly home. The ice flown back to Norway was cut up and used in drinks, which were then served to journalists at the documentary premiere. Glassvat still exists today under the name Glava, proving that the publicity stunt was successful. The company is still producing glass wool for use as insulation 61 years after the incredible expedition. They employ up to 500 people and are based in the town of Askim, about 1,000 kilometers from where their incredible expedition began. So, this was called the Ice Challenge. I hope you liked the story. So give us a like and do subscribe to our channel. Thank you.